I will be starting in 1 minute, please. Thank you. It doesn't matter to me. No, it does not matter as long as you get there, and I think I would jump an offer, and then people will put you on in the motion. If the motion passes. Now that our clerk has found his seat, I'll begin the meeting. Thanks, Andy. I make the time 3 o'clock. I'd like to welcome everybody. It's May 22nd. It's our last council meeting for the month of May 2018, so I'd like to welcome everybody. Hope it was a good holiday weekend for everyone. Councillor Harold Sonnenberg will not be with us this evening. He is absent on personal business. There are no ceremonial activities. I'm going to get to the approval of the agenda. Do you have a motion ready for me there, Mr. Clerk? Oh, there you are. You're always right on top of it. Wells has moved. Columbus has seconded that the agenda be approved as presented. Any discussion? No changes that I'm aware of. Those in favor? That's carried, so we will proceed with the agenda as written. Are there any disclosure of pecuniary interest to declare? If so, you can declare the nature thereof. I hear of none. There's no closed session this afternoon, and there are no presentations. That brings us to item number 6 on the agenda. This is staff report PW 18-32. It's the 4th concession drain report for consideration by this council. You can find it in your agenda on page 7, and I will go to page 7 and I will ask, well, I guess I should read what the application is first. That's protocol. This is staff report PW 18-32. This deals with the 4th concession drain report for consideration by County Council. I will now officially open the public meeting held under the Drainage Act. I advise those in attendance that we are here tonight to consider the engineer's report under section 78.1 of the Drainage Act. There will be a subsequent stage, the drainage corridor revision, where assessed costs can be discussed. However, we are here this afternoon to consider aspects of the engineer's designed improvement. So we're not going to be discussing costs that have been assessed. That is for another meeting. The proposed improvements are also not related to a petition. Lee Robinson, will you present 1832, please?
Through the mayor to council, before you this evening is the report for the 4th concession drain for consideration by council. There have been several public meetings that have been held, as well as private meetings with a variety of the property owners that are affected by this. The drain is in poor repair and needs to be addressed, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
I will open it up for questions from council at this point. Are there any questions for staff on 1832? Councillor Oliver, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. Lee, you mentioned that we did have the compulsory public meetings. I saw the original drainage report is, or the original drain is a number of years old. Can you sort of give us how long ago were the public meetings in connection with this drain?
Through the chairman to council, there's been several of them, including in 2016, when
Okay.
the original draft report was done. And they held the most recent meeting in September of 2017, and then had some private meetings after that as well to try to resolve some of the landowners' concerns.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. Further questions? Councillor Columbus?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Looking on page 25 of the agenda package, and there's an Ontario Limited number there, and it's the same number twice. Is that a duplication, or is that,
Through the chairman to council, that would be because they own multiple property in the area.
okay? Is there any way we could get names of the parties involved? Like, what if it's a relative or something, and you got a conflict?
Through the chairman to council, I don't believe that we actually have the ability to find out who owns the numbered companies. That sort of the creation of the numbered companies is done by the private property owners, and it's not information that we have access to.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Height, please.
Thank you, Mayor Luke. Through you to Public Works, I see the total cost for Norfolk County is $494,000. We have $950,000 in our budget. Is that going to be enough money to continue for the rest of the year doing other drainage projects?
Through the mayor to council, we do the maximum amount of drainage work that we can possibly do on an annual basis within our budget. And if there is a reason to go above and beyond that, we bring a report forward to council. So I'm confident that we have sufficient money to address this matter.
Okay, so like Dingle Creek is one that's been coming up. Do you expect it to come forward? I know it's not related to this, but I'm just concerned about the money.
Through the mayor to council, Dingle Creek will be coming forward likely for construction in future years. We're still resolving some of the legal issues with respect to all of the appeals, et cetera, that are ongoing with respect to that drain.
Okay, thank you.
Further questions from council, please? None at this time. I will proceed. Is there anyone in attendance this evening that wishes to speak to the design or to the engineer's report? No one wishing to speak to the design or engineer's report this evening? Okay. Is there anything further from council? I would then ask for a motion to close this public meeting. Councillor Oliver has moved. Councillor Height has seconded that we close this public meeting on the drainage report 18-32 discussion. Those in favor? This public meeting is now closed. There is a staff recommendation at the beginning of page 7. What are your wishes, Councillor Brunton?
The recommendations in the report, thank you.
Thank you, sir. I have a mover. Is there a seconder? Councillor Geisens. I'm going to read it quickly. Moved by Brunton, seconded by Geisens that this staff report 1832, fourth concession drain report, be received as information. A bylaw be given 2 readings provisionally adopting the fourth concession municipal drain 2018 improvements report dated March 16, 2018, prepared by Stephen Brickman, professional engineer. And further, that staff be directed to send a copy of the provisional bylaw and notice of court of revision to all required property owners. And further, that the first sitting of the court of revision be scheduled in accordance with the provisions of the Drainage Act. And further, that upon completion of the Drainage Act appeals, the Drainage Superintendent act on behalf of council to continue with the requirements of the Drainage Act and make all arrangements for completion of the drainage works. Is there any discussion on this recommendation? I hear none. Those in favor? That is carried. Thank you. I omitted to mention at the onset of the meeting that, again, folks, our meetings are web streamed and televised. I know that my cell phone is in the silence mode, and we do not have a camera volunteer this evening for this meeting? Let's go to staff reports, please. The first one is found on page 27. This is staff report CS 1825. This report is about Friday the 13th, the July 2018 event. You wrote it, Mr. Cridlin. I'm going to get you to deal with it.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through the Mayor to County Council, I will be brief. This is a standard report which comes before County Council with each Friday the 13th event, which as long as the event includes road closures, leasing of county property, that sort of thing. It is a little longer than most reports because we are going into one of our bigger events in years, maybe even record-setting. So a couple points I'd like to bring to County Council's attention are the changes from an ordinary or a previous Friday 13th would be there's requests for Chapman Street and Market Street for the road closures to begin at 2 p.m. instead of 4 p.m., and that's to allow for the setup of a beer tent with the Lions and the Board of Trade to have vendors in early to catch the dinner hour visitors to the event. There's also a Kinsman would like to have camping in the Kinsman Park east of the town of Port Dover to start Wednesday night instead of Thursday night. And there are 3 beer tents, 2 on private property and 1 on Market Street. I would also like to bring council's attention to page 3 of 6 of the report. The end of the second sentence, you'll see the words lot corner of Main Street and Walker Street on, and then there's a 6 p.m. in there. Obviously, that's a misprint, and we wanted to bring that to your attention because it is a recommendation, and the clerk has been notified, and we'll remove those two, that 6 p.m. I don't know, it was a cut and paste, got blended in there. So with that, I'll turn it over to County Council for any questions they may have about the event.
Thank you very much, Mr. Cridlin. Questions from staff? Councillor Oliver, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The only one bill that caught my ear as I was listening to you give us the highlights was the matter of now starting camping on Wednesday instead of Thursday. Admittedly, it's the service club, and we know they do a good job, but did staff have any concern about the fact that, as we've all known for all these years, residents are somewhat concerned about Friday the 13th becoming more than a one-day event? And we've extended the vendors and all of that starting on Thursday evening. Now, this is the first time I recall a request to start something on Wednesday. Do we need to have any concern from potential complaints from neighbors about the camping starting 48 hours, so to speak, before the end of the event? Or is that something that staff are pretty confident shouldn't be a problem?
Through the Mayor to Councilor Oliver. Yes, when these requests come in for changes, staff look at each and every one. And the Kinsman rationale was obviously the campground is located outside of the downtown, and with the increased numbers we're expecting, we saw it as perhaps a good thing to allow some people to get in ahead of time. And we, you know, if we feel it's going to be a positive thing for this event. A smaller event, we would probably have to look at it, maybe not allow it again to keep it within the couple of days, but we thought for the bigger event, it would at least allow the campers to, if they wanted to, come in as early as Wednesday night, early Thursday morning to help relieve some of the traffic and in the busier days, busier event.
Just to follow up to that question, thank you, Councilor Oliver. Mr. Cridlin, when I went through these, I'll call them 21 points to the resolution, I believe the camping is the only one involving Wednesday night. I don't think there's anything else in here other than the camping.
That is correct.
Thank you. I think that's an important issue brought up, very important. Councilor Columbus, please, thank you.
There's just one thing to add here. It's not the report, I don't think. The parking passes, the passes for residents who live in Dover, where's that going to be at?
Through the Mayor, I'm happy to say that I don't know if this afternoon or tomorrow morning we were able to work a deal with, I think it's Earth Solutions that do the water and sewer billing, And I believe the billing goes out on May 22nd, so I'm not sure when it goes out, but we will have 3,800 households in Dover covered in that, and 2 passes per household. And we also, Board of Trade are well on their way of setting up in Powell Park as other years to get the folks who maybe didn't get it or need it for businesses. We are dropping passes off at a couple of the trailer parks, and we also, our marina, they'll have about 1,000 passes there for our 450 boaters to come in. So I think we're in really good shape. The delivery through the mail with the Earth solution, if I'm saying that right, really helped us. We're ahead of the game in that. Through the mayor, yeah, they're good, and I should have brought a copy. I do apologize. They are good until I believe it is October 2023. So they're good. They're good for 5 years.
5 now instead of 3. That's good news. Any other questions on this report? Well, thank you for that report, Mr. Cridlin, and the resolution in front of me has been moved by Councillor Wells and seconded by Councillor Columbus, and you have all of those, you have the wording that I have in my hand for CS 1825. I am not going to read it unless somebody wants it read, then I'll get them to read it. You okay? You've read it? You're okay with that? I'll call the question. Those in favor? And that's carried. Thank you. Mr. Cridlin, thank you for all the work on this and your staff, please. That's carried. Our next staff report is 1838. This concerns the Long Point Causeway Big Creek Bridge speeding posting. It is found on page 40. And Lee, I'll get you to give the staff room report, and this is on posting the speeding, and I am not going to entertain questions on any other aspect of the bridge. We'll get to that under other business. If you have questions about what's happening, where we're going, I think we'll spend the time there, and we'll deal with this report, which only deals with the speeding. I think that's fair that we deal with this, the other aspects of this bridge a little later in the meeting. Lee, go ahead, please.
Through the mayor to council, before you is the report to reduce the speed on the Long Point Causeway Bridge, as well as put a load restriction in effect. It is currently signed and has a load restriction on it, as well as the speed reduction. This is to adopt this by bylaw, which makes it easier to enforce from an enforcement point of view. And as we know, enforcement is extremely critical in this area. I'm happy to report that with these in place and the voluntary compliance that we have been experiencing for the most part with respect to that area, that we have seen no additional deterioration since we put those in place, whereas we'd seen an extremely rapid deterioration from the beginning of, or from the middle of April until the middle of May. So it's actually having the desired effect, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Questions to Ms. Robinson on this report? It's been moved by Councillor Columbus and seconded by Councillor Geisens that report 1838 Long Point Causeway Bridge speed posting and information update be received, and that a bylaw be passed by council to establish the speed of the Long Point Causeway at 30 kilometers per hour and a load reduction to 11 tons for a distance of 400 meters, such distance centered on the Long Point Causeway Bridge, and further, that signs advising of the speed and additional advisory signs as recommended by the Ontario Traffic Manual be installed. Discussion on this recommendation, please. Those in favor? That is carried. Thank you. On to page 43, Staff Report 18-33. This is concerning the Legacy Fund. Mr. Johnson is here, and I'll turn things over to him, please. Mr. Johnson?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. To Mr. Mayor, through you, Mr. Mayor, to members of council, On April 24th, we discussed the legacy fund and the endowment model, and on that meeting, the endowment model was approved, and as a result, the legacy fund policy needed to be revised or amended to include the particulars related to the endowment model. In the report FS 18-33, the changes to the policy are highlighted, and also the revised policy is attached to that report. After the April 24th meeting as well, with the council direction, I immediately contacted the One Fund investment group and maximized our equity portion of the target per the current policy. And then with the revised policy before you today, it will give us a little bit more room for the equity related investments, and then if this gets approved by council tonight, I will be in contact with One Fund immediately tomorrow in order to reach that target mix. If there's any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Thank you very much. Questions to staff? Councillor Brunton, please.
Thank you, Mayor Luke. Through you to James. James, I asked this question some time ago. If we today said to you, bring our money back and we want to invest it somewhere else, is it all liquid right now? Or are you telling me some of that's locked in because it's so much in bonds?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Brunton, there is some market loss on the bond investments to date. So if we were to cash out, per se, then we would have a realized loss on those investments.
Okay, well, that bothers me because some time ago I asked that question and everybody said that it was, our principal was protected, but there was nothing was said that we had to leave it in there. I asked if it was liquid at the time and they said yes. I'm not sure if that was you I asked. I don't know if we have to go to the video to find that out or, anyways, the point is, the more I read this, and I know we've made a decision, but I'm concerned. I still am concerned. We're going to draw out, am I correct to read this report on page 45 where it says in 2018, we're going to draw out 2.5 million? Is that correct?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, you're correct, Councillor Brunton.
So on September of 17, we made no money per se, $275,000. So you're saying today we can draw out $2.5 million, and it's not September of 2018, right? It's confusing.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Brunton, with the endowment model, it's there for the long term, so we can have a sustainable payment each year of the 2.5 million to fund the Norfolk General Hospital and as well as the roads reserve. And that is a sustainable payment that we can have every year. And the theory is, as the One Fund folks demonstrated at their presentation, is that over the long term, that principle will be maintained through the dips and valleys that occur with investments. Through you, Mr. Mayor, Councillor Brunton, we will receive that payment in 2018. We haven't decided when in 2018, but it will be a 2018 payment. Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Brunton, if it's another year, another bad year, and it dips below the principal, they'll front us the money, more or less, and then over the future years, then that front or payable, or however you want to term it, will be replenished through either future earnings or, it says in the policy, prior earnings as well. So if it was 5 years down the road and we have another bad year, that $2.5 million will be sustained and they can take it from previous earnings for that example. Today, we don't have any previous earnings, unfortunately, but over the long term, we hope to have a sustainable base or a cushion, if you will, in order to maintain those payments without affecting the principal. Now, to answer your question about if they take, well, we will have the $2.5 million this year, and if it's up until that payment, if we haven't made, if the investment earnings doesn't quite reach $2.5 million, then we would set up a payable with them in order to book it properly, to track it properly as well.
If they're going to give us 2.5 and we haven't made that on the principal, then either they got lots of money to burn or they're going to take it out of our principal. They have to. Does that make sense? Is it because it's pooled? They're just saying, oh, we got the pooled money, we're going to draw it from that fund. Because their bonds are, I assume, where the loss is. We assumed that there 2 months ago, so. Correct?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, that if there's no investment earnings above and beyond the principal, they would have to pull on the principal in order to give us that sustainable payment, but we would book it in such a way to preserve the principal to be replenished right away as soon as the earnings come into play.
Okay, my last question is, say, in 1 year's time, when do we officially go into the endowment fund? Today, tomorrow? When do we officially enter into that program?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, as soon as this policy is passed, then we will be in the endowment model.
Okay, so 6 months or 1 year from now, can we draw out our principal? Or is that a no? Yes? Like I like to use the figure of 70 million. I don't like the 69 and change. $70 million is our principal, we'll say. 1 year's time, if we're in the endowment plan, can we withdraw our 70 million? Is it liquid or is it not?
Through Mr. Mayor, we can stop this program anytime we like. So if a year from now we don't like how it's going and we want to pull it out, we can do that. There's no restriction on the amount of time that we have to use the endowment model.
I realize we can pull it out, but will it be the same amount in the principal? Or is it going to be a loss? If there is a loss, will there be a loss to us?
So through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councilor Brunton, so the investments themselves,
Yep.
in the equity portfolio or the bond, or if we use a portion of the high interest savings or what have you, those investments, the performance of those investments will be the same. They will be reported to us the same way as whether we use the endowment model or not. And those investments, the mix we're changing in order to better reflect an endowment model, which is why we want to increase the equity portion.
Yeah, I understand that part of it. I guess you're saying 9 months from now we'll be 50% in the equities, right? That's the way this page 44 shows us. Correct? And I'm going to give it benefit of the doubt. So in 12 months' time, but you want to change this to a calendar year also. So what do we got left here? 6 months? 4 months? 8 months? Where are we? January, February? 7 months from now? Can we say to you, if we aren't happy with a statement we get, we want our money out, we're going to look somewhere else to invest it. We can do that, you're saying?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, yes, absolutely. We're not locked in to the endowment model by any means. However, at the time, I probably wouldn't recommend it because we've only given them a small amount of time in order to use the new asset mix in order to make the investment earnings that they were talking about at the presentation.
Well, I hope it works out, James, but I guess I am concerned, and I think I bought into the endowment, and I guess I bought in for a year, if I could use that term. Failing that, if I'm back here, I guess if I'm not back here, I won't have to worry about it. But if I am back here, I certainly would like to see, if it's not profitable to this municipality, I want out, plain and simple. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Height, please.
Thank you, Mayor Luke. Through you to the Treasurer. Now, in your report here on page 44, 2 of 5 in your report, third paragraph here, it says that this withdrawal rate that you're recommending has been sustainable in 100% of the 30-year rolling period from 1926 to 1995. What happened after that? Was it non-sustainable?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Height, those are the figures given to us from One Fund Investments. So that's the backup they use in order to prove that even, through that time, there was some pretty heavy-hitting markets. And so those are the figures that they use to come up with their endowment model.
Okay, so we're using old data to invest all of our money in. That's how I see it. And then on the bottom of page 45 here, it says, when the actual returns are less than the when the actual returns are less than the annual payment, the initial value is maintained and a payable will be initiated. Is that you creating on the payable or a receivable? Because there's no way, we haven't, out of the 3 years previously, we haven't made 2.5 million. Only 1 year we have, correct?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, the first year we made 2.9 million, the second year we made almost 2.5 million, and then the third year is the bad year.
The dog, right. So 2 out of 3, we failed to meet this. And that's where I'm concerned, because we'll be withdrawing 2.5, and on those 2 out of the 3 years where we failed to meet it, that has to come from somewhere, like Councillor Brunton. They're not going to front us the money and say, here is your free money. It has to come from the principal, just like if we were to cash out on the bonds today, we're going to have a realized loss, which we can't do. So even with their equities, I'm a bit confused on how they're going to get us out of the bonds and still not take that realized loss. But my question is, it has to come from the principal if we don't meet those targets. Is that not true?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Height. The purpose of the endowment model was to get a sustainable cash flow to Norfolk County, and the years in which there's great returns, then anything excess of the 2.5 million will go into the investments and generate more interest. On the poor years, where there's less than the 2.5 million, to make up the difference, it would come out of the excess earnings. Unfortunately, at this point of the game, we don't have any excess earnings built into it. So if we have a bad year this year, then yes, unfortunately, it would have to pull on the principal. However, over the long term, and through the presentation that the One Fund made in April, over the long term, to generate those excess earnings in order to provide those sustainable payments, if we hold the investments for the longer term, then the principal will be replenished, and we wouldn't have to worry about it. It's a difficult thing to see today because we've had a bad year. However, over the long term, this is the way to, in my opinion, this is the way to go to get the sustainable cash flow.
Okay, what if we reduce the number? We're taking 2 million out. What if we reduce it to 1 million? Would it be more sustainable because then at least we're 2 out of the 3 years that we're actually above that target?
If we reduce the sustainable payment, and this will be reviewed on an annual basis, I plan on taking a report to council, even though the policy says on an annual basis, I want to bring one biannually, just because of the way the markets are, and this is new. However, if we reduce it to 1 million, then we'd have to determine which service level we want to drop. Do we want to stop making payments to the Norfolk General Hospital, or do we want to take $1 million off the payments towards the roads reserve? So if we were to reduce that payment, then we'd have to make those kinds of decisions.
Okay, I understand that, but I'm just not that comfortable with this, because if we strike out for the next 10 years, and we're pulling out $2.5 million, and we're only making even $1 million, we're in the hole 1.5 year after year, not including inflation, because that's not being factored in here. We could whittle the entire endowment fund down, and it's gone. I don't see that as being very sustainable. That is, I don't know, and then we're asking to put basically $33 million into equities. Our fees go from 0.4 to 0.6, and there's no guarantee on it. I'm not sure I like this, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Mayor Luke. I was looking on page 46 and under interdepartmental implications. It says income earned from the legacy fund may or may not fund projects from other departments. I'm not sure I understand that. Why is it making reference to the 2 million going to Public Works and Roads and the 500 to the hospital, or is it making reference to other departments on top of that?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Black, that's sort of a general comment under those interdepartmental implications. Every year, we will be looking at the sustainable payment, and perhaps next year, Council will decide to take part of the roads reserve contribution and contribute it to a project specific to another department. So that's the reason why that wording is there.
Any other,
Yes, Mr. Mayor, to James, a couple times it's been brought up where apparently the government's going to allow where you can join up with other municipalities to do a joint venture in investment. Will you be looking at that in the next 6 months?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Columbus, yes. The One Fund Investment Group is putting together a model which enables municipalities of our size to participate into the prudent investor legislation that came out. We don't know what that model looks like today, but that is definitely something that I'll be looking into, as well as other options. We can go off on our own and partner up with another municipality, or we can just stay the course.
you okay with that? Councillor Oliver, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have two questions, one of which is a real quick one, and I just noticed it today as I was looking at the chart on page 44. James, the current target, I guess, is the apportionment of the investments based on what has been in our legacy fund policy, but I see that actually adds up to 105%. So if you don't mind, could you investigate and see which one of those is higher than it was supposed to be in the original policy? Unless my math is wrong, and I don't think it is. But that's just probably a typographical thing. But my other question, Mr. Mayor, and I did forward this to James, and he gave us a response, I think everyone probably saw it, where it talks about the annual commitment of our $500,000 to Norfolk General Hospital for their capital campaign. My recollection, Mr. Mayor, and I hope somebody can correct me if I'm wrong on this, but I don't think they were planning on being 10 years out before they were going to start construction. As soon as they had all their money either in the bank or pledged, as in the case of our share or our contribution, I think they are intending to start construction. So James acknowledged that in that paragraph on page 45, paragraph B, it really only should have said continue to earn interest until 2025, which will be 10 years out from when we said we were going to start making the 500,000 commitment annually. But my real question is, if they're ready to start building in the year 2020, for example, are we not going to be able to begin to actually turn over cash to them because it's tied up in our investments until 2025? Or will we in fact be able, Mr. Mayor, to give them, let's say, an initial chunk of $2 million because we've had it theoretically committed for the first 4 or 5 years? That's the part that's a bit concerning to me. And it's even in the context of questions from other councillors about investments being into, if you like, locked into something where we'll take a big hit if you take it out and so on and so forth. So, James, simple question. Assuming they ask us to start paying them some of our $5 million commitment in 2020, will we have the cash to be able to do that?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Oliver, I can answer part of that question. The part that I can't answer is I'd have to refer to the clerk. The way the motion reads in February 2016, when it comes to the amount of money that we were granting to Norfolk General Hospital, there's a motion, part of that motion is at the end of the 10 years, some sort of delegation from the hospital in order to receive those funds. So I'm not sure of the particulars of that. However, to answer your question about the amount of money that we're putting aside in the legacy fund, we have some money earmarked currently, and as the 2025 comes closer, we will be moving that money into, say, the high-interest savings account within the one fund or something similar for when we do make the withdrawal. It'll be a straight liquid withdrawal rather than affecting the investment portfolio.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, thank you, James. That certainly does give me some reassurance. I think I would, if you're okay with it, Mr. Mayor, in light of what James said, and to our clerk, Andy, it would be helpful to me, if nobody else, to receive a refresher copy of that motion. Because I'm sure he's right. I remember them being here. I certainly remember the discussion and being enthusiastic about making the commitment. But I'd like to see what we said in our actual motion as to when that money could physically start being turned over. It doesn't have to happen today, just an information update. It's fine. Thank you.
Okay, yeah, I'm with you on that. I certainly remember the conversation, but not particularly the motion. Exactly. Councillor Brunton, please.
Mayor Luke, for letting me speak again. On the same note, Councillor Oliver, I do recall some of that, and I made the motion at the time. And I recall I asked Mr. Robichaud at the time to show us a copy of the letter that he sent to the hospital.
Yes.
And at the time, I spoke with Mr. Ford, or Mr. Ford addressed this council, and he said that if everything goes all right, we will make the $5 million commitment by the end of 9 years, he was hoping, because it would accumulate the interest and so forth. And I do recall that conversation too. But I know in the motion, at least I asked for this, that we do not just give them any money until they start construction. And I think it was at the end of the 10-year period. And that's, I think, because we didn't want to give them the money to use it for whatever. We wanted to go to construction. But having said that, I guess we all need clarification. So, but on the same note, James, can you tell me, through Mayor Luke, how much in the legacy fund is the balance for the hospital? 2, 3 years? How many? What's the balance roughly?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Brunton, we have 3 years worth of contributions in the legacy fund, which is a little bit over 1.5 million.
Okay, so what about, and does that be kept separate in order to accumulate that interest to possibly in the 9 years?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Brunton, yes, that is separate. We track it separately within the one fund portfolio.
Okay, and what would the balance be of the legacy fund without that, taking that out? I think Mayor Luke brought that up at our last discussion. We were at 69.5 minus, so we're around 68. Is that safe to say? Around 68 million?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, that's approximately correct, yes.
Okay. Looks worse than, doesn't it? Anyways, question two, last one, I guess. Did you decide on the 50% in the equities, or is there, we can put whatever we want in the equities?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Brunton, during the presentation that one fund did, they had a couple scenarios on the mix of equity versus other forms of investments, and that is the one that the one fund recommended. And I had discussions with Kelly Rogers and Donna Heritage on the mix that we would need in order to get the $2.5 million sustainable payment, and that's the mix in equity that they recommended. And so it's over the one slide that sticks in my mind from that presentation is it's over a 7-year period with the peaks and valleys, and after the 7-year period, the principal has enough cushion in it in order to absorb these sustainable payments.
Okay, and I guess the last thing, I'm a little bit concerned we still will have 50% in the bond market, right? in the end here after the 9 months. It's the way the figures read. Correct? I hope they're better this time around with the bonds than they were last. So, thank you.
Councillor Height,
Just asking for a recorded vote.
when I get to the motion, we'll do that. I don't have the motion out on the floor just yet. We're in the question period. I have a couple of questions, Mr. Johnson, and just want to be clear on this. First of all, just getting back to something you said, did we not, our first year in 2015, make roughly 2.4 million?
Mr. Mayor, in the first year of the Legacy Fund, it was approximately 2.9 million. I don't have the figures in front of me, but I have them in my head. And the second year was close to 2.5 million, and then, of course, the third year is the not-so-good year.
Well, the reason I thought it was the other way around was I believe that in 2015, council put $500,000 into the NGH fund from the levy in January 2015. In 2016, the $500,000 to the hospital fund came from the earnings of one investment. So maybe I got those two figures around, but backwards. And then in 2017, we made $275,000 last year as of the end of August. And I don't believe we put any money into NGH since that time, certainly not at the budget session a few months ago. I thought there was only $1 million contributed to NGH, not $1.5 million, because nothing in 2017 was contributed either from levy or the earnings. Well, we didn't have $500,000 to contribute. So do we have $1.5 million in the hospital or just $1 million?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I'm looking at the
Yes.
figures now, and I apologize for my earlier statement. We do have $1,003,797 set aside for the hospital.
$1,397,000, and would the $397 then would be interest from
Correct.
3 years? Thank you. The other question I have, and it's been touched on, but I want to be clear on, Mr. Johnson, is this. Let me just use the figure. Say at this very moment, going into the endowment fund, we had saved for round figure 68 million. I'm just throwing that out for easy math. Let's say that in a year hence, we had a bad year and we made 500,000. But we're going to draw 2.5. So would that mean that in a year hence, because we're drawing that $1.5 million out to offset, does that mean that our initial investment now, or our lump sum principal, I'll call it, will be reduced, say, from 68 down to 66.5? That's what we're really gaining interest or income off of that, rather than the principal amount we started out with back in 2015. Isn't that a fair statement? We're drawing off our own principal to meet what we think are our needs. Is that a fair statement?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, that's a fair statement if we had 3 bad years in a row.
If we had 3 bad, yes. Any other questions? I do have a mover for the recommendation that's outlined on page 43, and that is Councillor Black. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Oliver? Moved by Black, seconded by Oliver, that this report, FS 1831, Legacy Fund Policy Amendment, be received, and that council approve the 2018 annual payment of $2.5 million to Norfolk County as described in Report FS 1831 Legacy Fund Policy Amendment, and further that council approve Policy FS 29 Legacy Fund Policy as amended. Any discussion on this motion before I get to the recorded vote? Councillor Black, please.
Thank you, Mayor Luke. I have my name on the motion as the mover. I support it, and I supported it last time when I guess the one people were here. My rationale for supporting it is, I guess, just using my own information from being around for a while now and having some money and investing and looking at markets. And I think the point of the data back in the 30s or whatever, the Depression time, was to show that even during those bad times, the market still slowly moves upwards. All the information that I've ever seen, if you put a graph together, it's constantly going upwards, even above the cost of living. And it may dip, like the line's not going to go a straight line, but it's going up and down, up and down, up and down. And that's the whole idea of long term. So if you look at a graph and compress it, those ups and downs are more dramatic. If you stretch it out, it becomes softer, and the drama isn't there. I've seen it with my own daughter's education savings plan. You know, it's that time it went down, and if I'd taken it out then, I would have had a loss. But I had, I'm not going to take it out. You know, I'll use some other money or something, leave it in. And good thing it did. Came back, it's on its way up again. So the whole point of this is not just, looking at it from year to year, but from year to years. That's the message that I got from our educated staff, who we pay a lot of money to give us this sound advice, and the same with our investors. I mean, these are people that are in that business day in, day out. So looking at my own experience, it seems to coincide with our staff and the one. So that's why I'm supporting this.
Anything further? And we'll go to the recorded vote. Anyone else? Go ahead, Councillor Brun.
Just want to ask James one more question, if I may,
Yes, you may. That's in order.
regarding this. If we were to turn this motion down, James, my understanding, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that we move off to some other investment. We lose big time on the bonds. You said they would not guarantee, the bonds are at a loss now, my understanding from what they said. So if we don't accept this endowment plan, and we drew out our principal, it wouldn't be very good. Is that correct?
My understanding, and perhaps the clerk can help me out here, if this motion is not passed, then we would go to the original legacy fund policy, which would basically, we would keep going as is with the asset mix that's there today.
Which includes the bond mix we have now, correct?
Correct. Like the maximum target in the original policy for equity versus bond is bonds 50% and 25% equity. And with the new policy, it stretches that out a little bit more for the equity portion.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Mr. Clerk, please record a vote. I've read the motion.
Councillor Height.
No.
Councillor Geisens. Councillor Columbus. Councillor Oliver. Yes. Councillor Black. Yes. Councillor Brunton. Yes. Councillor Wells. Yes. Mayor Luke.
No.
The item carries.
It's carried. And just before we move on, I just have a couple of comments on my rationale. As you know from our last meeting, I don't support the endowment at all. And I want to say that a couple of things here. I guess, first of all, there are options, even if we proceed with the first program. Maybe our 2.5 million is a dream that we're going to be able to draw that out every year or finance ourselves to draw that. Maybe that expectation in today's market is too high. I think it's a terrible, terrible mistake to start getting into a program where we may have to draw on the principal amount. And I recognize that probably won't happen year after year, but if we were going on the last 3 years of performance, we would still not be at a point where we would be able to make that kind of We've made roughly 5.6 million in the first 3 years. We haven't made 7.5. So we would have to, for 2018, make a further 2.5 million plus another, on top of that, we'd have to make over another $1 million just to be at a break even after 4 years. This 67.7 million that we got, our taxpayers, from the proceeds of Norfolk Power, this should be fun, having this money to invest to help offset reserves and other expenses that our ratepayers incur from time to time. This has not been fun. This is not fun, having to look people in the eye and saying, guess what? We made $275,000 off of $70 million in a year. Something should be different. And, you know, Ontario Hydro, billions and billions in debt because they spend the money before they get it. The provincial government, billions and hundreds of billions in debt because they spend the money before they make it. And that's what we're passing on to our children and our grandchildren. And, you know, there's a time to borrow and to venture and get a mortgage, absolutely. But I'll tell you, when you've got a windfall of 70 million and you have to go out in a year that you have made $275,000, you're going to draw in that year $2.2 million off the principal. I personally think that that's something that I really, really struggle with. I don't know where the market's going to go this way over the next 10 years or that way. I don't think there's a person that knows. We're drawing money that we haven't made yet, and we're reducing our principal. We may never see a principal of $67.7 million again, and that, to me, does not sit well with me. Councillor Wells, thank you.
Mr. Mayor, I've sat here very quietly and listened, and to me, I would have appreciated maybe your comments before the vote was taken, but not after the vote was taken. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
And I can't debate the motion once it's on the floor. My job is to...
I don't think I asked you to debate it. If you have an opinion, you have every right to speak your opinion before the vote is taken. After the vote is taken, I understand what you're doing, but I think your comments would have been very helpful before the vote was taken. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Wells. I appreciate your comments. Thank you. Let's go on, please. That finishes our staff reports. I am on page 49 under communications. We have several. The first one is a request from Marcy Elliott to waive the fee for the rental cost of Lions Park Pavilion. I have a mover, Councillor Black. Do I have a seconder? You're a bad boy. Councillor Wells, I'm dealing with communications, the first part on page 49, which is the request to waive the rental cost of the Lions Park Pavilion here at the Lions Park in Simcoe for the Addiction Supportive Housing Reunion. I have a mover, Councillor Black, but I need a seconder, Councillor Height. I will make this comment before I read the motion. The cost, in case you're wondering, is $58. It was $57 last year. It's been increased to $58. I'm going to put it on the floor, and then I'll get to you, Councillor Black. Black has moved. Height has seconded the request from Marcy Elliott for a grant to pay for the rental of the cost of the Lions Park Pavilion on May 27th.